welcome to the Papers Podcast. Linda here. As usual, I have with me the dynamic quartet. I was going to say dynamic duo and plus one, but it's a dynamic quartet, and that includes John.
Let's hope we're not doing math today. Hi, everybody.
And Lara.
Hi, everyone.
And Jason. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Just before we start, I'd like to comment on a comment that was made by one of our listeners, Adine Nelson, who's a pediatrician from Cornell. Adine says, wants to add a point to our discussion of the challenges in the paper of episode 52, which was the one about joy in medical education. Adine thinks that by selecting highly rated educators, we create a murky chicken and egg situation. Does teaching bring joy, or does joy make you a teacher who's more likely to be highly rated by your learners? He's not saying a better teacher, just more highly rated. He would argue the latter, that human beings mirror each other's emotions, and that will be reflected in their ratings. That enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm. If it looks like you're having fun, your group will have fun. And he thinks that this may have skewed the results of the papers. Well, Adine, we did say that there were challenges and concerns with the methodology, although we did not specifically mention this one. And we did say that more studies should address methodological concerns, probably including this one. So the bottom line is, I agree with you. And thanks very much for picking up something that we didn't make absolutely explicit. Please keep listening, and please keep giving us your thoughtful comments and feedback. So now, let's go to Jason, who has an interesting paper for us today. Go for it, Jason.
Thanks very much. I want to start with a couple of anecdotes. The first is I had a nice resident, who shall not be named, come up to me at the hospital and say, hey, I heard your podcast. You guys are like med ed intellectual giants. I said, well, thank you so much. And then she added, in your own minds. I thought that was awesome.
That story I didn't believe until the punchline at all.
And then she walked away. I also want to mention that John flew to Ottawa, where I live, last weekend, and we went and saw a concert. John pulled his best Courtney Cox. He's up there dancing with Bruce Springsteen. It was awesome. Well done, John.
You saw the boss?
Not just see the boss. He was right in front of us.
It was so good. I will Courtney Cox my way anytime to get closer to that god of rock and roll.
I'm so jealous.
And then the best part was John and I left the concert, got in a car, and went and played hockey. How Canadian was that? That was awesome. Yeah. Well, I played hockey. I'm not sure what John was doing.
Well, I had more than one beer, so I would agree with that assessment when I was playing hockey at midnight.
Doesn't beer sort of loosen up your muscles so you don't have to do a warm-up?
Yeah, let's do
It
that.
loosens up your inability to back check. I'll tell you that.
All right, so let's talk teaching today. I've entitled this episode "Hot for Teacher." You'll hear why in a second. We work in challenging days as healthcare professionals. I think you would all agree. I'm going to ask you in a minute about those challenges. Obviously, we work in a world with pandemics and cutbacks, more patients, chronic diseases, new technologies, more patients, metrics, quality standards, medical legal issues, and more patients. And there might be a theme here. Is it any wonder why teachers in our environment report high levels of burnout, educational exhaustion, and inability to take on more? I certainly live in a medical school where we're constantly asking the teachers to do something more or do something different, and we get pushback. At the same time, countries around the world need more learners, more teachers, and new teaching methods. So why do teachers teach? And normally at this point, I would ask something like, hey, John, Lara, Linda, why do you teach? What's your joy of teaching? But we're not going there. First, we're doing the problem. I want to ask each of you, what are you hearing from your fellow teachers about challenges to be a good teacher? And we're going to go Linda, John, Lara.
So absolutely, I agree. It's more and more and more. But to me, it's that combination of more with less. It's those more teachers, more students, more work, more patients, whatever, but less resources. So you're dealing with that extra load, the EMR, the doubling the class size, the demands from administration. with, oh, by the way, you don't get anything to help you with this. So to me, although we'll get there eventually, teaching is actually a bit of a relief from this.
John?
The challenge I think that I hear, and I want to be cautious, this is my take and my anecdote, so I don't want to speak too broadly, is that as health professionals, we're holding the system together more and more with our own grit and our own time. And the space and the capacity for teaching is not accounted for in those metrics. So in Ontario, the province where I practice in Canada, there's a report card that's put out quarterly ranking emergency departments. I'm an emergency physician. And I'm ranked as a busy inner city tertiary academic teaching center against a community hospital. And the government decides that's an apples to apples comparison. So my friend who's the chief of that community hospital, that's not even 15 kilometers from me, is number one in the province. And I'm not sure where we rank, but it ain't one. But the metrics that they're accounting for is simply patient-oriented metrics, which to one worldview makes sense. But I have the extra capacity of more than 4,000 learners that come through my hospital every year. That's not in the scorecard. So there's a little bit of that. Now, here's the other side, and I want to be really wary of this is not my old man sitting on my porch yelling at the kids to get off the lawn. But there is a different kind of transactional relationship that I'm starting to experience with learners, which is deliver my education now. Where is my education? Rather than I am in a role of collaboration beside you, challenged with the same issues around patient care, and will take on that mentoring or take on that apprentice type of model. And I think that's probably a little bit of me just saying, kids these days. And when I was a kid, and teachers probably said the same thing, but there does seem to be a bit of a misalignment of incentives. It may be the learners pushing back and saying, hey, we're doing a lot for the health systems as well. And so where's that return on investment for our case, which is the education, but they're directing it at the individual rather than the system. And so there's this antagonistic viewpoint. Both of us are saying the system's breaking, we're trying to hold it together. And I can't believe that you need me to teach, or I can't believe that you're not teaching me. And so the conflict doesn't happen at the system level, it comes down to the individual level.
So what I'll add to that is the challenges that I hear. I think one of the things that happened around 2020, and it's still happening now, but when the pandemic hit and when here in the US, there were the George Floyd movements and the Black Lives Matters, around that time, there were several different events, many different happenings that happened at the same time. And society has fundamentally shifted. Society is fundamentally different now than it was in 2019. And I think we're only now starting to understand the depth and breadth of those impacts, of those happenings on who we are in medical education, health professions education, and as clinician educators. And what that means, from my perspective, the things that I'm hearing is about how educators are struggling to figure out who they are in this new space, in this new social set of structures, where learners, as you pointed out, John, have different orientations, different expectations, where patients do, where the systems that we work in have added pressures about advocacy and equity that are desperately important, but they didn't take anything off the list of things we're supposed to do as well. So I think what's happening right now, I think when I hear from educators who are struggling, it's that right now the world has changed and the job has changed, and we're not clear on what that means for individuals in individual contexts and how to manage. How do I pull this off, especially when they're not necessarily trained for the variety of roles and expectations that we have of them?
Wow, those are really good, powerful points. They resonate with me. The two that particularly resonate with my current lived experience is people or friends of mine or colleagues from multiple medical schools saying, I'm being asked to do more with less. This governments aren't taking it into account. They're counting on doctors and others to teach without additional funding. And I agree that something has changed, that people feel more burned out. There's a second theme though, and that is I have friends who are always consistently nominated for teaching awards who seem to love going to work and teaching. and their metrics are good. So what the heck are they doing that they put it all together, right? So what's the literature say about this topic? It says there's lots of frictions in our environment, to borrow that business term, more learners, greater expectations, financial productivity, met pressures, low compensation for this kind of education work, little acknowledgement, and incredible time pressure. So we've kind of touched on all of those. The literature also says that the more motivated you are to teach, it leads to better outcomes. So better teaching by whatever measure, better teacher well-being, better teacher retention, and more learner-centered teaching. So that's really interesting that if we can somehow tip a system or help people be motivated to teach, some good things happen as well. So that's what this paper is about. So enter Orsini et al. This is an authorship team around the world. I love saying where they're all from. So from East Anglia to Gifu, Japan. Linda, who goes to Japan all the time, have you been to Gifu?
I have been to Gifu, wonderful place. It's probably got one of the best med ed units in the country. And Rintaro, who is one of the authors, is actually comes over to Montreal every couple of years to visit us. He is a very rapidly emerging educator who's doing a lot of good work.
There you go.
I want Japanese educators to come visit me. Please come to the Hammer. I guess it's not as enthralling as a metropolitan city like Montreal.
Other authors from Calgary to Santiago to Amsterdam. So there you go. Pick a city. Their paper is, here's the title, What Influences Clinical Educators' Motivation to Teach? A BME Systematic Review and Framework Synthesis Based on Self-Determination Theory. They get marks for one of the longest titles we've done this year. This is a BME review. This is BME review number 90. And of course, it's in Medical Teacher. It was online ahead of print in October 2024, and I picked it out. I just thought this topic was in the air. So what's their purpose? They, quote, aimed to systematically search and synthesize research evidence from the clinical education literature on factors influencing educators' motivation to teach using a framework synthesis method and based on self-determination theory. It's kind of the title recapped. All right, so let me tell you a bit about methods. I am going to ask you about methods. We do a lot of reviews. There's a lot of reviews in MedEd, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. I really want to spend time on the implications of their findings. All right, so they stated they conducted this review using the Stories and Prisma guidelines. Everybody knows the Prisma guidelines. Does everybody know the Stories guidelines? I'm getting thumbs up from everybody. So Linda has it. So it's published in BMC Medicine, and this is my take on it. Feel free to jump in, John and Lara. Stories is kind of like an adaptation of Prisma applied to MedEd using not just quantitative methods. John, was that what you'd say with Stories? Okay, fair enough. Getting nods. Okay. Multiple databases were searched, and they searched for, quote, motivation and educators and HPE. They didn't search for teaching, which I thought was really striking to me. Like, why not use the keyword about your topic? Papers were excluded if they didn't address undergraduate and postgraduate. So basically, they limited it to undergraduate and postgraduate. They weren't published in English, so they basically excluded the rest of the world, or not primary research. So they wouldn't accept an editorial. They did look for journal websites, reference lists, grade lit searches, and they supplemented the strategy that way. They did an appraisal step. They appraised using Mirsky for quantitative studies and JBI instruments for the qual. Data was systematically extracted. They had a calibration exercise. So I'm going to pause there. That's just their sort of systematic search. John, do you have any comments on the strategy?
I thought it's an exemplary type of systematic review. I don't have any critiques of it. There's a couple points I just want to pull out. They're new to me, and I thought they're kind of interesting. The first is they searched the gray literature, and they didn't do it by just jumping to Google Scholar, which is kind of my default. Although there's evolving AI that might offer you new ways to look at gray literature. They went to a site called opengray.ea, which I think must be some kind of search engine. I don't think it's necessarily a repository. And they have a whole database of white papers, PhD dissertations, conference proceedings, et cetera, et cetera. And they use their own internal mesh headings, or I guess they're really more like titles or categorizations. There's only 20, but 3 of them. So we were talking, like 7, can't even do math as I'm trying to do multiple things in my head. So
I want the record to show that you can't do math on the fly either. Like,
I can do math on the fly,
no, you
but I was
can't.
actually looking over.
Evidence suggests that no, you can't. 3 of 15 is 5.
Concerning things in the corner of my vision. Anyway, so of those 20 categories, 3 of them are hilarious. One is the military, another is missiles, and the third is ordnance. And so you have that as part of your mesh terms. There's no education. So it's an interesting choice of a gray literature search. I thought it was funny.
That's awesome. Ordnance.
The second part is I had no idea what the JBI was. And so that led me down a rabbit hole. We're using rabbit holes as a metaphor a lot, but I had to do a deep dive to figure out what that was. And it actually stands for the Joanna Briggs Institute, who is the first matron of the Royal Adelaide Hospital sometime in the mid-19th century. And so that hospital is a major academic health center that has a big influence in medical education. I think it's kind of cool to have a reference back to the OG, the person who made that culture impossible. Which led me to the thing is, what's the JBI? And so then I found a paper by Majid, M-A-J-I-D. It's in Qualitative Health Research 2018. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And it has a whole bunch of quality research appraisal tools. And so Lara and I will usually argue something about SRQR or COREG. We've talked before about CASP. We've seen that a couple times on episodes, but they have a whole bunch of other ones that I've never heard of. Varpio, do you know what POPE is?
No, but it sounds rude.
You don't got no POPE? Can you pay, Po?
I'm not talking to you about this on the record.
Anyway, it's a true thing. I'm probably besmirching the reputation of those authors who've done fine work. It has total legitimacy. And so this paper will give you a whole kind of compare and contrast of all these different quality tools. No critique here, just to point out something that was new to me and maybe interesting to the audience.
So what I heard out of all of that was an amazing choice of paper, Jason. Thank you, John. That's awesome. Okay. Anybody else got any comments on their search strategy?
Yeah, I have a couple. First of all, I do agree with John that it was in general a good search strategy. I'm a little concerned about their choice not to use the word search term teach or teaching. And the reason is that I happen to know a paper by Yvonne Steinert called Why Physicians Teach, Giving It Back by Paying It Forward. It's in Medical Education 2015, and we can put this, we can post this as well. And it's actually about motivation to teach. And it comes up with some results that in some sense actually reflect what these authors found. So it would support it. And I think it brings up a problem with how search terms and choice of search terms can actually influence your results. Lara, would you agree?
Yeah, your search terms are key. And it is concerning if we know that there are papers that didn't get captured. So that gives us a little cause for pause. But Jason, you said you didn't want to spend too much time on methods. We've already done a fair bit, so I'm just going to add one little point. Because the manuscript said that their corpus was 29 manuscripts, right? The 29 papers was included in their corpus. So first of all, that feels a little small. But my bigger concern is this. So and this is a thought for anyone who's interested in doing this kind of synthesis and that relies on evaluation of the manuscripts for inclusion. So you have to evaluate the quality of the work therein in order to decide if you should keep it in your corpus for the review. And my thing is this: if you ever find you're in a situation where every single manuscript you found is of sufficient quality, hits the criteria for inclusion, for me, that's a moment of pause. And that's a moment of pause because my experience, and it's just my experience, so take it as an N of 1, but if you have 100% acceptance rate of the quality of the studies you identified, then you probably are not using either the right evaluation tool or there's a piece of that evaluation tool you're not understanding correctly, because there's in a body of literature, if you give 30 papers in any corpus, pretty much guaranteed one of them is not going to be meeting the kind of rigor and quality standards that you want. So anytime you have 100%, my suggestion to our listeners is just have a pause and ask, am I using the right tool? Am I using the right tool correctly?
That's awesome. I thought that as well. They sort of have a throwaway line like, all the papers were adequate quality without getting into the detail. Hey, Lara, while I still have you, can you just make a one-sentence comment on framework synthesis? They use the phrase all through the paper. And so what's your take on that?
Framework analysis, you asked for a quick sentence. Jason, I'll give you a very quick sentence. Framework analysis is an umbrella term. There are many different ways of engaging and doing framework analysis, framework methods. The idea of that work is that it's the short answer in my brain is a rack and stack approach to qualitative data analysis. What you're trying to do, and you can do it deductively, inductively, you can do both. There's, like I said, many different ways. But the idea is to, when you have really large qualitative data sets, you often use framework analysis because it's a very structured approach to analysis. And what you're trying to do is create coding structures that you can apply rather, depending on the approach, but usually kind of rigidly across a broad data set to say this paper had code A, B, C, not D and E, but G. But this paper had different ones. So you're really creating you will end up with a matrix of coded data. But there's many different ways of doing it. There is an Amy guide that exists about framework analysis that Klingberg is the first author. I was lucky enough to work on that with her and Renee Stellmeyer. So the Amy guide might be a resource for anybody who's interested in using it.
All right. So they used self-determination theory as well. So this is like one of their lenses for doing the analysis. It was chosen because it speaks to motivation and personality. It has 3 categories of motivation. Now here, these terms are important because this is used in this paper to analyze the data. Autonomous motivation, which is kind of like, I think of it as like internal, it's inside you. Controlled motivation, which I think is kind of transactional, like you get something, you're like it rewards. And amotivation, which is a funny category of motivation, but basically it says anything that demotivates you for a given issue. Previous work identified factors that impact teacher motivation in the system. And so they borrowed 3 other terms. So there's a 3x3 table forming as we talk. The system above you is anything the system structure does to impact teaching. Intrinsic is like what's inside you, like what motivates you yourself. And below is their term for things that bubble up from learners that motivate you. All of these concepts were incorporated in the study's theoretical framework. And so let me tell you the results. And this is where I think the value of this paper is. It's in this beautiful table 1. So Lara already identified that there were 7,700 records initially identified, of which they kept 29. Like, wow, that's incredible. Somehow they got down to my IQ level, 29. That finally met all the eligibility criteria. Publications were from 1998 to 2022, and nearly all of them are from the global north. Now, that's not unusual in med-ed searches, but you can't help but thinking that their eligibility criteria limiting things to English and so on must have impacted that list. About half the studies involved physicians. Most studies were surveys, interviews, or focus groups trying to get data from teachers. Okay, so and we said before, all studies were considered adequate, quote unquote, in terms of quality. So there's this beautiful table 1. It's a 3x3 table, and it incorporates SDT and the previous research on factors in motivating teaching. So there's factors from above, that's the system issues. There's factors within, and then there's factors from below, that's the learners. And then across the top is factors influencing autonomous motivation, which they value in this paper. Controlled motivation, which is that transactional, and amotivation, things that turn you off. And there's no surprises in the table, but what's so amazing is it's all in one place. So for all of you listening to this podcast who are in an environment where teachers are disengaged and you're trying to get them back in the game, this table tells you all the answers. It talks about how the system, in terms of the leadership of the people who organize a med-ed system, have a huge impact on how teachers behave. So that's the autonomy support. Opportunities to influence the design of the curriculum and the teacher's role, versus more transactional things would be things like job requirements, like you have to teach, or what rewards I get, and so on. There's some fascinating ones around learners and fascinating ones about what we bring to the table. So I'm just going to ask Linda, Lara, John, what's something that struck you from this table? It's okay if you overlap. I'm just wondering what you thought was valuable or area interesting.
So when I look at it and in my own head, I go back to those old sayings about internal locus of control and external locus of control, which I think is the first two categories that they've talked about. I picked lack of trainee continuity as something that struck me because it's a negative and it's in a motivation or negative motivation. And I think the opposite is also true. Trainee continuity probably is something that does motivate and probably goes into the factors from above. Trainees, faculty members, supervisors often have less time on service. And in my setting, that's pitched as something that's good for wellness of faculty. So you're not doing a month at a time, for instance, on a ward, you might do 2 weeks or 1 week. There's also decreased presence of the learner, which is also in some part due to trying to improve wellness. You don't have to be there every day. You have to be at a teaching session. You can take a personal day, whatever it is. So, or you're taking the day off post-call. So both of those things, in theory, are good for wellness, but it seems like they're bad for motivation to teach. Continuity is so important because you get to know the learner, you get to know their strengths, you get to know where you need to focus. So this is something that I think really makes sense to me. And it's something where I think we can intervene, recognizing that there's that tension between things like wellness and things like motivation. And how are we going to deal with that?
So the highlights results, in my mind, exactly what we'd expect to find. Create a context where an educator has autonomy, can provide input about the training program, has appropriate compensation and recognition, and they'll feel motivated to teach. Have a lack of support from the institution, a weak teaching evaluation system, heavy productivity demands, and they won't be motivated to teach. This feels really clear. Internal drivers like a sense of purpose and supporting learners to integrate into the profession and connecting with learners, professional growth. If the individuals have those drivers, then they're motivated to teach. So for me, the paper is a succinct summary of the body of literature they found, and I kind of see this paper as a line in the sand. We've done enough work on this topic and have a rather fulsome perspective on what motivates educators using this particular theory, right? Self-determination theory. I don't see this necessarily as a call for more research in this space, but I do see it as a call for harnessing the knowledge that we have available and to do something about educator motivation and evaluating the effectiveness of different efforts to increase motivation. The paper's table 1, it's called Factors Influencing Clinician Educators' Motivation to Teach, is a beautiful takeaway. This is the summary. That's the thing you're going to put in your cork board of life, post it there. Got it. Now that we understand the phenomenon, and I think this paper is suggesting that we do, what are you going to do? How are you going to implement these findings? So that for me is the bottom line of these results. There's one thing, though, I want to ask you all about, because did you notice at the front end of the paper, there was this interesting sentence where they talked about how the findings would be particularly relevant for distributed health professions training models. And then later again in the discussion section, it says, that the sentence says something like, quote, these findings support the distributed health professions education training model. But there was one sentence in the front and one sentence in the back. And I read this thing a couple times trying to figure out what connected. And I'm just wondering if I missed it. Did you see something? What does this have to do with distributed learning? I'm not really sure. John, maybe you probably read all the appendices and the notes that they took privately. You went into their house, you zoomed into their private life. Nobody likes it when you do it. It's creepy.
Talk to their mother.
Right? Yeah. Don't be that guy. But maybe you saw something there that I didn't.
Interestingly, I did try to get to the supplemental data and it was not available. I couldn't
do it either.
Publisher website. I went through my university access. I tried to pay for it. I did a bunch of stuff. I wanted to see what they had. And I think it's a publisher problem, but they keep saying refer to this supplementary this, and I wanted to see the original data or the table that usually says here's all the data from each study. Not available. So I did try to be creepy in an academic way, Lara, not my regular way, unsuccessfully.
Let's go back to you were willing to pay for it. Why don't you just pay me some money and I'll make a table of stuff and we can just do that there.
But I'm only paying if there's numbers in the table.
I'll put all the numbers
Okay.
and some emojis. There'll be extras. It'll be fun.
So here's my thoughts on the findings. There's lots of good stuff here. I would direct people that want to understand, here's how to align your teaching environment to be successful. But I'm going to focus my answers on some demotivators, what they call amotivational factors. And that's not me trying to be pessimistic, but my sense is that teachers are under threat as the health system becomes more fragmented. You heard my comment at the start. I think learners feel that they're holding up the system. Teachers feel like they're holding up the system. And when the teacher-learner dyad meets, we're like, we don't have time for this. And everybody's frustrated or challenged with each other. So if you can have a great system, you can see some of the ideas. But I want to focus on two things. First, they have a 9-cell table, so a 3x3. And they have a big blank spot around intrinsic motivation that's demotivating. And so it's interesting to me that they have a blank spot. It might be a function of they were so selective they only got down to 29 papers. If they had scrolled up to 60 papers, that blank spot would have fed in. And I think one of the blank spots they fail to meet is the decision around work-life balance. So here's a true case for me from 2 days ago. I made a decision to go do a mentoring session one-on-one with a trainee who I think has a ton of potential. And I mistimed when that session ended, and I got home just after my little one got to bed. And so I didn't get to kiss her goodnight and see her go to bed. I made a decision for that. I'm not sure if I'm always going to make that decision because I'm being asked by the system to make these choices. And so I don't see work-life balance here. And I think that's underappreciated. And any teacher will immediately be able to tell a very similar anecdote from the last week about how they made a choice for the benefit of their work as an educator against their own personal and other private priorities. The second part I want to call out because this is one of the soapboxes I love to get up on. Most recently, I was railing against some of the vice deans in my faculty on this matter, which is student evaluations of teaching. And they talk about a weak teaching evaluation system under the factors above. So I look at that as systemic, extrinsic factor that's demotivating. Can I just remind all of you, y'all know, can I just remind all of the listeners, y'all know, maybe not the evidence, but you know the experience, that student evaluations of teaching has been a debunked phenomenon for too long, and we should just say here that the system's broken, we need to rethink it. Because it's just misogynist, racist, ableist, homophobic, it's all the isms. And it's routinely shown to have no discrimination around teaching evaluation and teaching ability. It just has discrimination, the bad kind. And so that's the part I want to redline. It's here, but it's lost. And I just want to remind us that we need to have systems that are motivating, not demotivating for teachers.
Preach.
So that's I'll get off I'm not getting off this. So this is the one soapbox I'm going to stay on for a little bit.
Let's do this.
I'm always a little frustrated. We've
Bring them
done
down.
in previous lives a bunch of the meta-analyses of this data. Yep. And so maybe we should bring that back together on another ranty episode. We should do a ranty episode. That'd be my rant.
No, that's dangerous.
Unlike all our other episodes, you mean?
What we don't.
All right. Let me wrap this up. So again, delicious paper. The authors concluded that their findings should inform efforts to enhance teacher motivation, educational quality, and teacher retention. They finished with 12 recommendations. I'll summarize all 12 recommendations to do the right thing, which is what we were just ranting about. This is the value of this paper. This is my pitch to everybody before we have a little vote. If you look at table 1, if you just printed or saved table 1, and then use that as a checklist for your own teaching environment, you'll find things that are gaps. Yeah.
I think it's helpful to look at table 1 in conjunction with looking at the recommendations.
Because, they just basically tell us what to do next with them. All right. So I think this is a useful paper. My takeaways from this one was this paper covers a critically important topic. It gives you almost a checklist to look at your own environment, like I just said. The methods used were systemic, but they show examples of how you can exclude good papers by having very tight inclusion-exclusion criteria. So I thought that was I think it was a miss that we had mostly global north yet again. Hey, but kudos to the authors. They did a ton of work. Okay, so we're doing something different today. in the past, we had a vote for methods and a vote for impact. We're going to have a single vote, and it's what's the value of this paper to you? That's the new line. Like, is this paper something you're going to use to teach? Is this paper something that you think is going to change practice or change research or stimulate, like all those things? So that's what we're doing, 1 to 5. And we're going to start with Lara because she's so excited about this new scale. Lara, Linda, John, what's the value of this paper for you?
I love this new approach. I think this is a great idea. I didn't like voting before. The value of this. Why are you crossing your fingers, John?
I had this secret belief that with our new scale, you might play by the rules. I'm just being optimistic, waiting to see what happens. But please, you be you.
It's all good. I'll be me. Don't worry. And your delusion will soon be called asunder. But anyway, this paper is a value for me because it is a succinct, nice, tight summary of our understanding of what motivates educators. Like I said, it's a line in the sand. We're done. This is sufficient for me. So that's the value for me. So on a scale of 1 to 5, in terms of that particular value, I'm going to give this paper a 4 thumbs up emojis.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Linda?
And I'm going to give it a 4. I don't know about the thumbs up and the emojis and all of that, but it's a 4 and not a 5 because I am concerned that they miss papers. But having said that, it's one-stop shopping for somebody who is looking at how to motivate teachers.
I'm going to give it a 4. The part, I guess, here's my synthesis of all the parts I really liked. It's very systematic. I like the framework analysis so that they organize the findings, not just here is a linear or here's a random assortment, but it's organized in a way that the theory holds it together. And you can see it from that lens. So that organization takes a lot of data and makes it much more manageable. I think table 1 is a really helpful table. I have small degrees of critique in that the contextualization, and I think of a classic contextualization in my world where MD education at the continuing professional development lens is self-funded. Nursing professional education at the continuing professional development lens is funded by the system. And so you have different approaches. And so when you push it all together, you see some things, but you'll lose a bit of the nuance. And it's just a minor little thing, but there's maybe some nuance lost by the fact that they're down to 29 papers from more than 7,500. There's a bit of nuance lost because they've done it in a systematic way and not in a realist way, looking at more contextual elements, but it's still a great organization of the literature. I don't need to read another systematic review of teacher motivation for quite some time until the literature really moves the conversation forward.
Awesome. So I'm going to give this a 5 for all the reasons that my colleagues just said. They're just being, like grumpy, what's the word? Grumble bunnies. This is an excellent paper because the value of this, I just took on a job where I'm going to help change the teacher ecosystem. I'm just going to distribute table 1 to everybody and highlight things. And, this is a highly valuable paper. I recommend it to everybody. So there you have it. That's Orsini et al. Would love to hear from anybody who has any comments. Come hit us up through our Gmail. Come hit us up through the website. We would love to hear from you, or hit us on socials. We always appreciate your comments, your insights, why John is wrong about something. We always appreciate that. And we'd love to hear from you. So thanks for joining us today.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody. Thank you for all you do. Take care.
Bye-bye.